This is the lecture on identification and evaluation of children with suspected disabilities. My name is Dr. George Giuliani from Hofstra University, and today what we're going to be looking at is literally what the title says. We're going to be looking at the identification of children with disabilities and then the evaluation of these children with suspected disabilities. Now, under our federal law, IDEIA 2004, which I'll call IDEA from this point forward, under our federal law, every local education agency, or LEA, must establish procedures by which children in need of special ed and related services are identified. And these are known as child find efforts. Now, let's go back to this. Under the federal law, every local education agency, a local education agency is just going to be our fancy term for school district. So every time you see LEA, just think school district. So under the federal law, it says that every school district has to have these procedures by which children in need of special education and related services are identified. In a sense, school districts are required to find the children who may have disabilities, find the children who may have suspected disabilities. And these are known as child find efforts. Now, states are left to develop their own identification procedures, but IDEA requires an active effort to identify children in need of special ed services. So what the law is saying is that we're not going to tell the states how to do it and the way in which to do it. What they're saying is that we just mandate that you show that there's been an active effort to identify children in need of special ed services. And again, these efforts are known as child find efforts. In a sense, find the children who may have suspected disabilities. The federal law IDEA requires that before any student could ever receive special education and related services, before any student is placed in a special ed program, the student has to be evaluated, and we'll get much more into that as the lecture goes on. But the student has to be evaluated to determine first whether the student has a disability as defined by law, second, if the student requires special education and related services because of the actual disability, and third, the nature and extent of the student's needs that will be addressed in the IEP for that particular child. So again, what we're saying here is that you can't just feel like a child may have a disability and therefore provide the child with special education. It doesn't work that way. The child has to be evaluated, and we evaluate the child to determine first whether the student has a disability as defined by law, second, if the student requires special education and related services because of the disability, in a sense, is the student eligible for special education and related services, and third, the nature and extent of the student's needs that will be addressed for the student in the IEP, or the Individualized Education Program, for that particular student. Evaluation procedures determine whether the child has a disability and the nature and the extent of the special education and related services that the child needs. Now, it's very important to understand that when we're talking about the evaluation of a child for a suspected disability, that evaluation is an individualized evaluation, meaning that the procedures, the methods of evaluation have to address the student's unique needs rather than be some general assessment that can be used interchangeably with all students. So the idea is that when we are going to evaluate a child for suspected disability, it is an individualized evaluation. Everything is going to be individualized. It's not some general assessment that we can just use for all students. We're going to do everything individually to meet the child's unique needs. So suppose you're a teacher in a classroom and you wonder, I wonder if the child in my class may have a disability. In a sense, what are some indicators of children who may have a suspected disability and might need an evaluation? How would you know in your classroom whether or not a child might be one of those kids who might have a suspected disability or need an evaluation? Well, first, the child's rate of progress is not what is expected. In a sense, all the other children are making progress in a certain manner. This child is not progressing in that manner. Next, the child's level of performance is significantly discrepant from his or her peers. So the average on, let's say, a spelling test in the class is a 95 or a 90, and this child is consistently getting 50s on spelling tests. The child has a physical or health condition affecting educational performance. So the child has a known condition already, a known physical condition, a known health condition that might be affecting the educational performance of the child. The child's behavior or interpersonal interactions are adversely affecting educational performance. So the child's behavior in class is creating all kinds of difficulty in order to be able to perform at a level relative to his or her peers. And then finally, the last one, this child's response to classroom accommodations and modifications have not been successful. We've tried certain accommodations, we've tried certain modifications, and nothing seems to work. Ultimately, nothing seems to make a difference. So when a child's rate of progress is not what is expected, or the child's level of performance is significantly discrepant from his or her peers, or the child has a physical or health condition affecting the educational performance, or the child's behavior is adversely affecting educational performance, or the child's response to classroom accommodations and modifications have not been successful. All of these types of things, one or more of these things, should be indicators for you of who may be a child in need of an evaluation. This might be a child who has a suspected disability. And we'll talk later on in the course about what you would do as a teacher and how everything would go about it. Now, how are students identified for an evaluation for a suspected disability? In a sense, who are the people who normally evaluate, or the people who normally pick up that there might be a suspected disability or a child may be having significant difficulty? Well, first, the student's classroom teacher may identify that certain symptoms exist within the classroom that seem to indicate the presence of some problem. So the teacher may see that the student's work is below expectations for his or her grade, or the student's behavior is so disrupted that he or she is unable to learn. Second, it might be the student's parents. The student's parents may call or write to the school or the director of special ed and request that their child be evaluated, because they may feel that their child is not progressing as he or she should, or may notice particular problems in how the child learns. And when the parent notes a problem and requests an evaluation, the school must always follow through on the assessment process. This is the parent's legal right. So the parent may see that their child is struggling, their child is taking 4 hours to do homework, the child doesn't want to go to school in the morning, the child is crying, and when these things occur, the parent may be the one to say, I want my child evaluated for suspected disability. And finally, other school personnel or other outside professionals may suspect the presence of some type of learning or behavior problem and speak to the parents about getting permission to evaluate the student. This may have resulted from the student scoring far below his or her peers on some kind of screening measure or something that alerts this particular individual to a problem. Maybe the child is seeing an outside psychologist. Maybe the child is seeing an outside doctor or therapist. Maybe it's a music teacher in the school. Maybe it's a lunch aide in the school who sees problems within, in the interactions of the child. Maybe it's an assistant principal. So it could be other school personnel or other outside personnel. So ultimately, when we look at who are going to be the people who may identify a particular problem or who may see a particular problem, it could be the teacher, it could be the parent, or it could be other school personnel or outside professionals. This ends part 1 of the lecture. You can go on now to part 2.